It started like any other ordinary day, or rather, any other ordinary night. It was past midnight, and I was sitting in our living room just scrolling on my phone when I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My wife, Amelia, was home. She had been on a business trip for the last few days, a perfectly normal part of her job. Her company often required her to travel. What wasn't normal, however, was the tone of her messages this time. They were bubbly and full of a joy I hadn't heard from her in a long time. It made me smile, but a small part of me felt off. The door swung open, and there she was, standing in the doorway with a suitcase in one hand and her phone in the other. Her face was absolutely beaming, and she was laughing at something on her screen, a laugh that sounded almost too free, too light. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice full of energy. She kicked off her heels and set her designer bag down. "You won't believe how crazy this trip was. The meetings were endless, but we nailed the presentation. It's going to be huge for the company." I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's great, Amelia. Sounds like it went well." "It did," she said, still grinning as she pulled out her phone and started typing something. "Oh, and the food at the places they took us to? Unreal. Michelin star unreal." I watched her as she talked, noticing the strange glow on her face. Her energy was almost too much, and that laugh, that careless laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. For a split second I felt a pang of jealousy, not because she was happy, but because I hadn't been the one to make her feel that way. I stood up and walked over to her, giving her a light hug. "I seem really happy," I said, half joking. "Maybe I should send you on more business trips." She laughed again, but this time it sounded nervous. "Yeah, maybe," she said, pulling away to grab her suitcase. "I'm just going to unpack really quick." As she walked toward our bedroom, something inside me felt wrong. It was the way she avoided my eyes, the way she clutched her phone like it held some deep secret. I couldn't shake the feeling that her excitement was about more than just a business trip. She disappeared into the bedroom, and I stayed in the living room staring at the empty doorway. Then a strange silence fell over the house. Her cheerful laughter had stopped. In fact, the whole house had gone eerily quiet. Curiosity got the better of me. My footsteps were silent on the carpet as I made my way to the bedroom door. As I reached the door, I heard her muttering under her breath. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice filled with panic. "This can't be happening. Not now." I peeked inside and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed. Her suitcase was open in front of her, and she was holding a piece of paper, her face completely pale. The smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, gut-wrenching fear. Her hands were shaking as she stared at whatever it was she had found in her suitcase. I knew in that moment, with a chilling certainty, that this was not about a business trip. This was something else. This was a lie. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping into the room. She jumped at the sound of my voice, quickly shoving the paper back into her suitcase. "Nothing," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't match the fear in her eyes. Just work stuff." I raised an eyebrow. "Work stuff? You look like you've seen a ghost." She shook her head, closing the suitcase with a loud snap. "I'm fine. Just tired. I'll tell you about it tomorrow, okay?" Before I could say anything else, she was out of the room and heading toward the bathroom. The door slammed shut and I was left standing there, more confused and suspicious than ever. My gut was screaming that she was hiding something, and I knew I couldn't rest until I found out what it was. I did the one thing I never thought I would do. I waited until I heard the shower running, and then I opened her suitcase. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the bag as if it were Pandora's box. My heart was racing and my hands felt clammy, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what she was so desperate to hide. Slowly, I unzipped the suitcase and lifted the lid. At first glance, it looked normal. Clothes, toiletries, some folded papers. But as I dug deeper, I uncovered something that made my stomach twist. Underneath her clothes was a neatly wrapped gift box, tied with a red ribbon. It wasn't addressed to me. In fact, there was no name on it at all. But the size and shape of the box instantly made me uneasy. It was too personal, too intimate. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling. Inside was a sleek black lingerie set, far more provocative than anything she'd ever worn for me. My mind was flooded with questions. Why would she pack this for a business trip? And more importantly, why hadn't I known about it? Then I noticed a small card tucked into the folds of the fabric. My heart sank as I read the words scrawled across it in her handwriting. For when we're finally alone. My chest tightened and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was undeniable now. This wasn't some innocent oversight. This was a piece of solid, devastating evidence. Proof that my wife had been lying to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the card in my hand. I wanted answers, but I knew I couldn't confront her without more information. If I came at her now, she would just deny everything. I needed to be smart about this. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, zipping the suitcase shut and placing it back where she had left it. Then I grabbed my phone and opened the browser, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. I managed to log into our shared phone account. What I found only deepened the pit in my stomach. Her call log was full of numbers I didn't recognize, many of them with long call durations. One number in particular stood out. It had been called every day of her trip, sometimes multiple times. My pulse quickened as I copied the number into a reverse lookup site. The result came back almost immediately. The number belonged to a man named Ethan Reynolds. The name meant nothing to me, but the implication was clear. I stared at the name on the screen, trying to make sense of everything. Was this a coworker I'd never heard of? A client, maybe? Or was he something more? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was piling up fast, and none of it looked good. I heard the bathroom door open and quickly locked my phone, shoving it into my pocket. Amelia stepped into the bedroom, her hair damp and her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked at me with a strange mix of guilt and caution, as if she could sense that I knew something was wrong. "You okay?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. "You look pale." I forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. Then she climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, closing her eyes as if nothing had happened. I lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that name, Ethan Reynolds. I knew I had to dig deeper, but I also knew I couldn't let her know I was on to her. Not yet. The next morning, I decided to play it cool. I couldn't risk tipping her off, not until I had all the pieces of the puzzle. Amelia woke up as if nothing had happened, humming a tune as she made coffee in the kitchen. Watching her, you'd think she didn't have a single worry in the world. But I couldn't unsee the panic on her face from the night before. It haunted me. Over breakfast, I tried to get her talking. "So, any exciting stories from the trip?" I asked, casually, sipping my coffee. She froze for just a fraction of a second before flashing me her usual smile. "Not really," she said, shrugging. "It was mostly just work stuff. Meetings, presentations, the usual. Nothing fun." Her response was smooth, almost too smooth. I knew she was lying, but I didn't press her. Instead, I focused on my plan. I needed to gather more evidence, and for that, I needed access to her phone. After breakfast, she headed to the shower, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. My heart raced as I grabbed it. She'd always been careless with her passcode. It was still our wedding date. The irony of that was not lost on me. I quickly navigated to her messages, my fingers trembling. There it was, a string of texts between her and Ethan Reynolds. My stomach churned as I read them. Amy, I can't stop thinking about this weekend. It was perfect. Amy, you were perfect. I miss you already. Me too. I hate sneaking around, but it's worth it. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. The messages were explicit, leaving no doubt about what had happened on her so-called business trip. My chest tightened as I scrolled further, finding photos she'd sent him. Selfies in a hotel room, her in that same black lingerie. I couldn't look anymore. I locked the phone and put it back exactly where I found it. When she came out of the shower, I pretended nothing had happened. "I'm heading out for a bit," I said, grabbing my keys. "Need to run some errands." "Okay," she said, barely looking up at her phone. "See you later." As I drove away, I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and a new, cold determination. I wasn't the kind of guy to let something like this slide, but I also wasn't impulsive. I needed to be methodical. I pulled over in a quiet parking lot and called a private investigator. I'd never imagined I'd need one, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The investigator, a man named Jack, listened patiently as I explained my situation. He said, "I'll take the case. I'll need her schedule, any details about this guy, and access to anything you can provide. Emails, phone logs, social media." I gave him everything I had. As I hung up, I felt a small sense of relief. At least now, I was doing something. Over the next few days, I acted like nothing was wrong. I laughed at Amelia's jokes, listened to her stories, and even kissed her goodnight, all while knowing what I knew. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every casual remark from her felt like another twist of the knife, but I played my part. I kept reminding myself that the truth was worth the wait, and that I needed to contain the storm brewing inside me. Then, one evening, Jack called. "We've got something," he said, his tone serious. "You're going to want to see this." He didn't go into detail, just said he had something I needed to see and insisted we meet in person. The phone call left me on edge. That night, as Amelia sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I couldn't help but glance at her, wondering how she could sit there so calmly while keeping such a huge betrayal hidden. The next morning, I made up an excuse about a last-minute work meeting and headed out to meet Jack at a small diner on the edge of town. He was already there when I arrived, a manila folder sitting on the table in front of him. My heart was pounding as I slid into the booth across from him. "You're not going to like this," Jack said, his voice low and serious. He pushed the folder toward me, his expression grim. "But you need to see it." With trembling hands, I opened the folder. The first thing I saw were a series of photos. They were grainy, but clear enough to make out the faces. There was Amelia, laughing and leaning into a man I recognized immediately as Ethan Reynolds. They were sitting together at what looked like a hotel bar, their body language unmistakably intimate. One photo showed Ethan with his hand on her thigh. Another showed them holding hands as they walked into the hotel elevator. My stomach churned. But the worst was yet to come. Jack pointed to a USB drive tucked inside the folder. "There's more on here. Surveillance footage from the hotel. It confirms everything." I couldn't bring myself to watch it there in the middle of the diner. Just seeing the photos was enough to make my blood boil. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "From what I've gathered, at least a few months. They've been meeting up whenever she travels for work. This wasn't a one-time thing." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Months. She had been lying to me for months, sneaking around with this guy while I stayed home, trusting her, loving her. The betrayal was overwhelming, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to think clearly. "What else did you find?" I asked. He hesitated. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling out a printed document from the folder. "It's a booking confirmation for a weekend getaway. She and Ethan have another trip planned in a couple of weeks. It looks like they're heading to a resort in Miami." My hands clenched into fists as I stared at the paper. She wasn't even trying to stop. She was already planning her next rendezvous. The audacity of it made my blood boil. But I swallowed my anger. If I was going to confront her, I needed to do it on my terms. I needed to make sure there was no way she could wriggle out of this. "Thank you, Jack," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. He nodded, giving me a look of sympathy. "I'm sorry you're going through this." I left the diner with the folder and the USB drive tucked under my arm. I felt like a man carrying the weight of the world, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about cold, undeniable truth. And now it was time to decide what to do with it. That evening, I sat in my car in a deserted parking lot, staring at the USB drive in my hand. I knew I needed to see the footage, but a part of me was terrified of what I'd find. Still, I couldn't look away. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the files. The videos were time-stamped and arranged in chronological order. The first clip showed Amelia and Ethan meeting in the hotel lobby, their faces lighting up as they saw each other. The next clip showed them at the bar, laughing and talking like a couple on their honeymoon. Then there was the elevator footage, just a few seconds of them kissing before the doors closed. My chest tightened as I skipped to the final clip, showing them entering a hotel room together. The timestamp confirmed it was late at night, and they didn't come out until morning. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my seat, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The evidence was overwhelming, but it also gave me a strange sense of power. For the first time in days, I felt like I had the upper hand. She thought she could keep this hidden, but now I had everything I needed to expose the truth. Confronting her wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, but I also wanted to do it in a way that left no room for excuses or denials. The following night, I set the stage. I invited her to sit down with me in the living room, telling her I wanted to have a serious talk. She looked curious but not overly concerned. She had no idea what was coming. As she sat down, I placed the manila folder on the coffee table between us. Her eyes darted to it, and I could see the faintest flicker of panic in her expression. "What's that?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Something I need to show you. But first, I need to ask you something, Amelia. Is there anything you want to tell me? Anything at all?" She froze, her face draining of color. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked like she was trying to come up with an excuse, but nothing would come. When she didn't respond, I opened the folder and slid the photos across the table. "These are from your business trip," I said, my voice colder now. "Recognize them?" Her eyes widened as she stared at the pictures, her hands trembling. "I can explain," she stammered. "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, cutting her off. "But before you do, maybe you'd like to see this." I pulled out my laptop and played the elevator footage. The color drained from her face completely. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. "It's exactly what it looks like," I snapped. "You lied to me, you betrayed me, and you thought you could get away with it." She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't done. "I know about Ethan. I know about Miami. I know everything, Amelia. So tell me, how long were you planning to keep this up? Were you just waiting for me to find out?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. This wasn't a moment for sympathy. This was the moment she had to face the consequences of her actions. Amelia sat frozen, staring at the evidence laid out before her. The tears in her eyes spilled over, but I wasn't moved. This wasn't the time for her crocodile tears. I wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It just happened." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "It just happened? That's the best you've got, Amelia? Affairs don't just happen. You made deliberate choices, you lied to me, planned trips, snuck around. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident." She looked down at her hands, wringing them together as if that would erase the weight of what she'd done. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she mumbled. "Go this far," I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around with this guy for months, and you're already planning another trip to Miami with him? How far were you planning to take this? Were you going to run off with him? Leave me behind like yesterday's trash?" She shook her head frantically, her voice rising in desperation. "No, I swear I wasn't going to leave you. I just—" "You just what?" I interrupted, slamming my hand on the table. "Wanted a little excitement? Something different? Was I not enough for you?" Her silence was deafening. She couldn't even look at me, and that, more than anything else, told me the answer I already knew. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung heavy in the air, suffocating. Finally, she broke the silence. "I never stopped loving you," she said, her voice barely audible. I let out a bitter laugh. "You don't do this to someone you love, Amelia. You don't lie to their face, betray their trust, and sneak off to hotels with someone else if you love them. So spare me that line because I'm not buying it." Her tears came harder now, and she buried her face in her hands. I don't know why I did it," she sobbed. "I was stupid, selfish. I wasn't thinking." "That much is clear," I said coldly. "But now it's time to think, Amelia. Because this isn't going to end with you crying and me forgiving you. There are consequences for what you've done." She looked up at me, panic flashing in her tear-streaked eyes. What do you mean?" "I mean this," I said, pulling out the stack of printed screenshots and dropping them onto the table. "This is going to our lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment she looked like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Wait, no!" she cried, reaching for my hand. "We can work through this, please. Just give me a chance to make it right." I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. "You don't get to make it right after months of lying and cheating, Amelia. You've destroyed any chance we had of working through this. I can't trust you anymore, and without trust, there's nothing left." Her sobs grew louder, but I refused to let myself feel guilty. This was her mess, her betrayal, and she needed to face the fallout. I stood up, grabbing the folder and laptop. "I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. I need space to figure out my next steps. You can stay here, But don't expect things to go back to normal. This is the beginning of the end, Amelia." As I turned to leave, she called after me, her voice cracking. "Please don't do this. I'll do anything. Anything, just don't leave." I paused at the door, glancing back at her one last time. The sight of her, broken and desperate, should have hurt, but all I felt was numb. "You already left," I said quietly, "the moment you chose him over me." And with that, I walked out, closing the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my head. The emotions swirling inside me were a toxic mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I had never imagined my life would end up here, blindsided by the person I trusted the most. Amelia's pleas still echoed in my head, but they only made me angrier. She didn't care about me, she cared about being caught. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a small, cheap motel. It was exactly what I needed, somewhere to be alone, away from her. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folder I'd brought with me. I opened it again, flipping through the evidence. Every photo, every message, every detail solidified my decision. There was no going back. Amelia had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. His name was Alan, and he came highly recommended by a coworker. I told him everything about Amelia, the affair, the evidence. He listened without judgment, then laid out my options. "With the proof you've got, this could be straightforward," Alan said, "but it depends on what you want out of this. Are you looking for a clean break or something more?" I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted revenge, but another part of me just wanted it to be over. "I want a clean break," I said finally, "but I won't let her walk away unscathed. She has to take responsibility for what she's done." Alan nodded. "Fair enough. We'll start drafting the papers today." Later that day, Jack, the private investigator, called. "There's something you should know," he said, his tone serious. "Ethan's wife found out about the affair." I let out a bitter laugh. Amelia wasn't just destroying our marriage, she was wrecking someone else's life, too. I said, "Let her go public. Maybe Amelia needs to feel what it's like to have her world crumble around her." The divorce process was surprisingly smooth. With the evidence I had, Amelia didn't fight me on anything. We split our assets fairly, and I walked away with the house. As for Ethan's wife, she did go public, and the fallout was brutal for both Amelia and Ethan. But that wasn't my concern anymore. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. I realized that losing Amelia wasn't the end of the world. It was a new beginning. For the first time in years, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I had long neglected, and started focusing on my own happiness. One evening, a few months later, I met someone, Rachel. She was sitting at a coffee shop and we started talking. She was kind, funny, and easy to talk to. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope. As we exchanged numbers and said goodbye, I realized something important. I wasn't broken anymore. Amelia's betrayal had hurt, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was stronger now, more confident in who I was and what I wanted out of life. Moving on didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant choosing to focus on the future instead of the past. Sometimes life throws curveballs that force you to reevaluate everything. But in the end, those challenges can lead to something better if you let them. My story didn't end with betrayal. It ended with a fresh start. And for that, I'm grateful.